Welcome to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. This program is an outpouring of the ministry going on at Calvary Chapel, Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
Now, why does Mordecai refuse to do this? We don't know for sure. It doesn't say. It could have been that Haman was claiming deity, like many kings in that day did. I'm a god, bow to me. And that would have been sufficient reason for Mordecai not to do it, right? But maybe it was simply that Mordecai knew who Haman was and knew that he was an Agagite. And he knew better than to bow to somebody that was determined of God to be his enemy. So he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't bow.
Sometimes things of this world will tell us to do something Scripture tells us not to do. Today, Pastor Dan says in the story of Esther that Mordecai knew not to bow to Haman because he knew he was his enemy. What are some things in your life you're bowing to that aren't from God? There's a constant battle for our hearts. The enemy wants to take you away from worshiping God, but God wants you to follow Him fully. He wants you to bow to Him alone because He's worthy of all praise. Now turn in your Bible to the book of Esther chapter 2. As Pastor Dan continues his message, always setting the stage.
Verse 8, let's keep going. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. So even here we begin to see God's hand is a part of this. God's hand is in this, in choosing her to become a part of the group of the ladies that now have a chance to be interviewed by the king. And maybe she'll become the queen. She's now in that group. God's hand is in this. God is orchestrating this. When did she gain her beauty? Basically from birth. God has been orchestrating this since before she was even born to put her in this position. And now it's going to come to pass. Verse 9, and the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet or good to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. So even here in this verse, we're getting the idea that Esther found favor in the eyes of this chamberlain, this eunuch, that was over the women that were being gathered together to be interviewed by the king. She found favor with him. In the beginning of verse 9, the maiden pleased him, this man that was set over them, Haggai. And so just God's working in her life, God to bring her into this group. And now the man that's running this job interview, more or less, she's found favor with him. And God's orchestrating all of these things to happen in such a way. Now, verse 10, Esther had not shown her people, nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her or commanded her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. So it's clearly saying that Mordecai asked her to hold back and not reveal her identity as a Jew. We're told in the New Testament, if we deny Jesus, he'll deny us. But if we acknowledge Jesus, he'll acknowledge us, right? Well, this is not akin here to denying her faith and her identity. It's more like waiting for a strategic opportunity. Mordecai's not saying to Esther, look, if somebody looks you in the eye and says, what nation are you from? He's not saying lie to them. He's just saying, look, don't just be out there telling everybody that you're a Jew. That's the idea. It's akin to it's a little bit like playing dumb if somebody comes to your door, some cult comes to your door and wants to tell you about their false religion. It's a little bit like holding back your knowledge. Just wait, let's see what they have to say. Just kind of hold back and then spring it on them and let them know what you know then at the right moment. So this is the idea. It's sort of like, it's not, Esther, I want you to lie to them. It's, Esther, just hold back and wait. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind all the time, right? That's the idea. Verse 12. Now when every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been there 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months was with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given to her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king. So each of these women got their choice of jewelry and things that she could put on and then go in for her one night with the king. Great movie, by the way. Verse 14. And in the evening she went, on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of that guy, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So 12 months are going by to get these ladies, sufficiently Persian enough to go before the king. And then they spent an evening with the king for him to get to know them. That's the idea here. One at a time, they would get to go in and sort of be interviewed by the king. In verse 15, now when the turn for Esther, the daughter of Abigail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing. Now remember, what they're saying is they gave each of these ladies a chance to take whatever jewelry and beauty, what else you want to call it, accoutrements? They gave them a chance to bring whatever they wanted. But it says here about Esther that she chose to bring in, verse 15. She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed to her. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. Now we're beginning to see the heart and the character of this beautiful woman, which certainly is even more valuable than the outward beauty. It's Esther's turn, and she decides that she doesn't need much jewelry. She doesn't need the outward adorning of just the jewelry to make herself beautiful and worthy. She sees herself as much more than that. But she does take what the eunuch told her. See, this goes back to a few verses ago where it says that she found favor with this eunuch. This eunuch and her struck up a good relationship. They had mutual respect for each other. And so when she decides to go before the king, she takes his advice on the simple couple things to take. Because she knew that he knew the king. And the eunuch is trying to help her. Look, the king doesn't need you to wear 1,000 pieces of jewelry. The king would be happy with just this. And she does. I appreciate this, that she's not afraid to just, be herself. And she's not afraid to just get a little friendly advice from somebody that knows the king. She doesn't have to do that typical thing. Do you ever feel like you have to do the typical thing to go along with the world? Well, everybody at my age does X, Y, or Z. I guess I have to too. She doesn't feel that way at all. In fact, it's going to end up winning for her. She's going to win the heart of the king by being herself and being able just to take a little advice from somebody that's trying to help her. So she appreciates that. So it works. And now in verse 16, it says, So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is in the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So this is now 4 years on since the divorce of Vashti, and now Esther is made queen here in the presence of the king and everyone. And interesting enough, this is immediately after a crushing defeat of Persia by the Greeks at Salamis. This King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, he just went up against a major battle against the Greeks at Salamis and lost. So that's when he comes home and he marries Esther. And so it's, what is the Lord doing in putting these things together? Only God knows. But in God's providential will, he sets up all of these things to have Esther in the right place for the right time. And so now verse 20, verse 18, the celebration is on. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Now, maybe the release was a release from taxes. Maybe the release was a release of money from the treasury. We don't know if this was money or houses or gifts, but it's a party. Verse 19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate, which of course is the place of judgment of a leader. And Esther, in verse 20, had not yet shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up under him. So the celebration is on, and now we see Mordecai sitting in the gate, which basically is indicating, it wants to make sure we understand that Mordecai, although a Jew, was a high-ranking officer in the Persian government. To sit in the gate of a city meant you sat in the place of judgment. If there was disputes in the city with merchants coming in or out of the gate, you were there to settle the disputes. He was some type of magistrate or judge for the Persians right there at Shushan. So we finish the chapter here in verse 21. And in those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, they were angry. And they sought to lay hands on the king. Why is that? Because the king just suffered his first defeat to the Greeks at Salamis. We just talked about that. And so we've got this behind-the-scenes look at how these two guys were, Bigthan and Teresh. I mean, how about the nickname Big? Hey, Big, come here. Maybe they called the other one Small, just to make, I don't know. Big, hey, Big and Small. So they're conspiring now against the king to take him out. And in verse 22, the thing was known to Mordecai, whom told it to Esther, the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. So do you get the idea? Mordecai is the one who found out that these two guys were plotting to kill the king. So Mordecai got word to Esther, hey, Esther, this plot's going down. You got to go warn the king. And she did. She went in and she warned the king. Verse 23, and when inquisition was made about this matter, it was found out. Therefore, they were both hung on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. And so this will ultimately be a 13-year marriage between Esther and Xerxes. It will end up being a 13-year marriage. Xerxes is going to end up being assassinated by Artabanus, who was the commander of his royal bodyguard, by the way. So, we don't get that in the scriptures, that this is only going to be a 13-year marriage, but sure enough, it will be. So there were threats coming all the time. His royal bodyguard is going to end up being the guy that takes him out about 12 years from this point in the story. It's not in the Bible, but it's real. Just like this is real. And so these threats, like that we read from Big and Little right here, they happened a lot. And this one was found out by Mordecai and relayed through Esther to the saving of the life of the king. So, though loyal to God, the believers are also loyal to the ones that God's entrusted to them, right? And that's what we see here. They're loyal to their earthly rulers just like they're loyal to God. We should be. The New Testament commands us that, right? To honor the king. Honor those that are placed in authority over us. Pray for those put in authority over us. There is only a super rare time that when those two authorities in our life conflict, then we must obey God. But other than that, we need to be this. We need to be these people that would defend our king, defend our governors, defend them when they're doing what's right. Or even when they're doing something that's questionable, but it's not ungodly, it's not unbiblical, then we need to let them have that authority. It's okay to disagree with them, but we need to support their right to make that call. And it's a nice story of Esther and Mordecai looking out for the king. That they may not agree with everything he's doing, but they recognize him as the authority that's been placed. Now, let's press into to chapter 3. It's only 15 verses. And this really finishes the thought. Again, before we even get to the story that we all know about Esther, about this brave entrance to the king that's going to come later, these 3 chapters set it all up. And I believe chapter 1 was there simply to show us how, for God to even get us to those moments where he wants to really use us, sometimes he's got to move pieces out of our life. Chapter 2, we see how God's moving pieces into Esther's life, into Mordecai's life, into the king's life, putting things together. But chapter 3 now demonstrates the last part, really, of setting the stage, which is all of this setting of the stage is now bringing together the opportunities to show faith. In other words, the problem finally rears its ugly head. And that's what we have in chapter 3. The actual problem that's going to need God's servants to intervene and get involved with finally comes up. So chapter 3, we now have this decree of Haman. Chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, did King Xerxes promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, who was an Agagite. That's what's important about Haman. He was of the family of the Agagites. Okay? And so the king advanced him and set his seat above all of the princes that were with him. In verse 2, all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did he give him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said to Mordecai, "Why are you transgressing thou the king's commandment?" In other words, oh my goodness, do you realize in not bowing to Haman the chance that you're taking? That's what they're saying to him. Now this, first of all, this is important to recognize who Haman is. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but Haman, it says here, is of the family and the lineage of Agag. He's an Agagite. He's of Agag. Does the name Agag ring a bell? King Agag? Well, way back in the days of King Saul, even before the reign of King David, King Saul was told by God through the prophet Samuel to go wipe out all the Amalekites. Take them out. Their time of judgment had come. God is the only one that can declare that somebody, their time of judgment has come. It's time to wipe them out. And God said that about the Amalekites and their king, Agag. Well, we know that story, and we know that King Saul decided not to wipe out all of the Amalekites. He kept King Agag alive. And other things too. Well, I kept some animals alive because I'm just going to sacrifice them for you, God. He disobeyed. And that's what got King Saul kicked off the throne and replaced by David. So this man, all of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, is of the lineage of that King Agag that was never put to death, that should have. It should have been put to death. And so this Haman probably was raised in his blood to hate the Jews that slaughtered most of their lineage and most of their family. And so Mordecai must have known something about Haman to not bow to him. And that's the setup we have in chapter 3. Haman's asking everyone to bow to him. Now, why does Mordecai refuse to do this? We don't know for sure. It doesn't say. It could have been that Haman was claiming deity, like many kings in that day did. You know, I'm a god, bow to me. And that would have been sufficient reason for Mordecai not to do it, right? But maybe it was simply that Mordecai knew who Haman was and knew that he was an Agagite. And he knew better than to bow to somebody that was determined of God to be his enemy. So he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't bow. And so now we have this animosity now between this new high ruler Haman and this lowly judge, Jew Mordecai. Verse 4. Now it came to pass when they spoke daily with him, and he hearkened not unto them. So all of Mordecai's buddies are saying, listen, just bow to this guy. We don't want trouble. He hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did he reverence Then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all of the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So the idea is that Mordecai's like, look, I'm not bowing to him, it's because I'm a Jew. And maybe he was saying, I'm not bowing to him because I'm a Jew, and God told me the Agagites are our enemy. Or maybe Mordecai's saying, I'm not bowing to him because I'm a Jew, and I only worship one God, and he's claiming to be a God, and I won't do it. Whichever one it was, the idea is that the word got out. The word got back to Haman. Hey, this Mordecai, he won't bow to you, and he says it's because he's a Jew. And so maybe Haman already knew what that meant. Or maybe Haman was like, Jew, why does that ring a bell? Jew, what are Jews? And he's looking up in the history books. And he's like, oh, I know what the Jews are. And he goes and he remembers the story of his ancestors. One way or the other, whether he knew right away or whether he had to find out later, he all of a sudden turned his entire animosity against this one man, Mordecai, and now he's turning his animosity against all of the Jews because of this one man. So Haman, he could have let this matter go, but he clearly had a bone to pick with the Jews. You know, justice would have been to just correct Mordecai. If you're Haman, justice would have been to correct Mordecai. Wrath would have been to crush Mordecai. I'm going to throw him in prison, or I'm going to kill him, or whatever. That's wrath. It's satanic to say, I am so upset with what Mordecai did, I'm going to wipe out all of the Jews. That is otherworldly. That's satanic. That comes from the pit of hell. And how many other times throughout history has that happened? That somebody was inspired to wipe out all of the Jews. That is a spiritual thing that's happening. That's not a human thing to say, well, therefore I'm going to wipe out all of them. That's satanic. It sure is. Verse 7. In the first month, that is in the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, or pur. That is a lot. That's what it is. It's a dice. Okay? They cast pur, or dice, or lots. I'm going to say pure, okay? But it is a dice. That's what it is. Die? It is a die? Yeah, die. Okay. So they did this. They cast this pure before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month. That is the month Adar. Okay, the idea is that Haman is casting this dice to determine what month he's going to go execute his plan of killing all the Jews. It would end up being 11 months before he effects his plan. That's what it says. It came up to be the 12th month. So 12 months from this time, when he determines he wants to kill the Jews, that's when his plan is going to get executed, to execute the Jews. That's his idea. So good and bad. I mean, good, they've got some time for intervention to happen, but bad that he wants to wipe out all the Jews. So we have this word used here, the pure, or the pur. Okay, the plural in the Hebrew is the I am at the end of a word, right? Like how about cherub? What is a cherub? It's a type of angel. What is cherubim? Multiple. Cherub, exactly right. That's why that's one of my pet peeves if somebody writes cherubs, because it's like making the plural. Okay, it's either cherub or no, I said it wrong. I don't like it when people write cherubims, because then you're using the plural of the plural. So the I am is already the plural.
You've been listening to Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk. Today, Pastor Dan has been teaching from the Old Testament book of Esther. The story of Esther is a powerful reminder of God's providence and His ability to work through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Though God's name is never mentioned in the book, His presence is woven throughout every event, from Esther's rise to being queen, to her courageous decision to approach the king and save her people. Esther shows us the importance of faith and boldness, trusting that God is always at work behind the scenes, even when we can't see Him. Her story reminds us that no matter how uncertain or dangerous the situation, God's plans will always prevail, and He invites us to be part of His redemptive work. If today's teaching encouraged you, visit us online at cchambersburg.org to hear more messages like this. Under the Media tab, you'll find an archive of teachings, or you can download our app for easy access to sermons and updates wherever you are. You can also learn more about Calvary Chapel Chambersburg, located in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. If you're in the area, we'd love to have you join us for worship and fellowship. Service times and directions can be found on our website at cchambersburg.org. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for more valuable insights and biblical truths from the book of Esther. This has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.